2, 1. Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar number 16 of our webinar series, Australian chapter of International Geosynthetics Society. Today, 28th of January 2021. As you know, we are Australian chapter, Australasian chapter, basically covering Australia, New Zealand, and PNG and South Pacific Islands. We are part of the IGS, which is the International Geosynthetics Society, with more than 45 chapters around the world. This slide is the IGS website, and the address is geosyntheticssociety.org. So as a chapter member of ACigs, you will become automatically an IGS member, and you can access the technical resources on the IGS website, and some of the very good papers, journal articles, and lots of events and activities that is happening in the IGS world. You can access through the IGS website. Also, our ACigs website, which is at the moment we are working to upgrade the website for Australian chapter. The address is ACigs.org, so you can become an ACigs member by clicking on the membership button there, or you can simply email us at info@acigs.org. This webinar, like all of our other webinars, will be recorded and will be available on our website for future access. So you can see here is a snapshot of some of the previous webinars that we have made available, a recording of those webinars for our members. You can ask for a certificate of attendance at the end of this webinar. It will look like something like this. You just need to email us at info@acigs.org, and we organize that for you. Today's webinar, so this is going to be a very interesting webinar. We thank our sponsors for this event, TRI Australasia, which is an independent geosynthetics testing institute, laboratory in Australia. So thank you, TRI, for sponsorship of this event.
Thank you, Warren.
Thank you, Warren. And as you know, the topic is ethics in geosynthetics. This is a very interesting topic, and I'm pretty sure you will enjoy it. And it's presented by well-known Boyd Ramsey. I said well-known, and I don't know if anyone in our audience actually wants to know who Boyd is, because I believe everyone knows Boyd. Who doesn't know Boyd in the geosynthetics industry?
Just very kind, Simek.
For formality, I just read this. Boyd Ramsey has been a leader within the geosynthetics, environmental, and waste disposal industry for over 30 years. He has a long history as an employee of GSE Environmental and has been involved with the design and selection of containment system at several of the world's largest cities, including New York City, Hong Kong, and other regional landfills, and hundreds of other municipal disposal sites in the United States and around the world. Additionally, he has been involved in hazardous waste disposal at sites in the USA. So thank you, Boyd. Before I hand over to you, I read this Aboriginal proverb. It says, "Look after the land and the land will look after you. Destroy the land and it will destroy you." By saying that, I hand it over to you, Boyd. So I stop sharing.
Okay. And I will start sharing my screen. Good day, everybody. It's best to go with good day these days. All right, CMAC, you looking at that properly?
Yes.
We ready to go?
Perfect.
Okay. Good day, everybody. Welcome. You're going to need to pay attention during this webinar, at least for some parts, because it will be interactive. I encourage you to use the Q&A button and make comments during the presentation. CMAC will be hosting and moderating through that. But we also have a couple polls for you to take and quizzes. So we're trying to keep this interesting. And I promise we will give the answers to the polls and quizzes also, so you won't go away empty-handed. At least some of the answers. The problem with ethics is that there are a lot of gray answers. So I'm going to use a lot of memes and postings like this. This is a Henry Rollins quote. We don't have a lot of time, so let's jump in. This is me. I have a website. If you don't know me, I know some of the names we talked about earlier. I know a lot of you, but if you don't know me, I have a website there. If you want to find out what I'm doing, you can go there and take a look. I put this slide up at the front of every presentation. I feel very fortunate that I have found a purpose for my life, something I like to do that I'm reasonably good at, that the world needs, and I can manage to get paid for. I hope you all land in that red square as well. It's not essential for a good life. I haven't been there my whole life, but it's certainly a good thing to do. So I also put this slide up, particularly with the ethics presentation. Before you criticize someone else, try and remember that you are probably a piece of shit. I don't claim to be any more ethical than any of you. A 2-minute conversation with my ex-wife will absolutely convince you of that. However, I have taken a look at this and I have some stuff that's interesting that I will report. So think of it that way. I'm from the United States, where this is unfortunately still our current worldview. Hopefully that will change. I am not being compensated for this one, although I've given this presentation a couple other times and gotten my expenses paid. So I put that caveat in there. Again, I'm not any more or less ethical than any of you. Some of this information is not my own. You'll see that when it gets presented. And if I offend you or if I upset you by anything I say here, I'm happy to talk about it offline, but not during the course of the presentation. So this is probably the last time I'll use a slide of the United States' ex-president. I won't tell the story because he's now our ex-president and not our real president, but he was actually filmed on video preparing to lie on national TV and then lying on national TV. Not the best ethics lead. So, all right, so we're going to start with this exercise. And again, this is not mine. You see the sourcing down there. There are 2 islands. There are 5 people on them, and it's difficult to get in between the 2 islands. So this is where everybody needs to pay attention. We're going to do a quiz here. And this is a very long scenario. So I'm going to talk through this, but you can also read it. You have these 2 islands, and on one island, there is Connie. By the way, the people are labeled A, B, C, D, E. So you don't even have to know their names. You can just stick the letters on there. And what I'd like you to do is get a piece of paper and actually write down answers to the questions I'm going to ask you. So, so we have Adam and Bob and Ernie on a big island, and we have Connie and the other gent on the small island. And it's very difficult to get in between the 2. Adam and Connie are a couple. They love each other. And he calls over the channel and asks her to join him because he can't swim. There's a raft on Connie's island, but she's too weak to row it across. So she asks Doug, the gentleman she's with, to help her. And he says he will, but only if she has sex with him first. She doesn't want to, but she agrees so that she can be with her couple, Adam. So Doug and Connie have sex, and then he rows her across to the large island. And Adam and Connie are reunited. But then when Connie tells Adam that she had to have sex with Doug to get to the island, Adam is repulsed, and he tells her that they can never be together. Meanwhile, Bob decides to build a fire so they can be warm and maybe be rescued. So Bob asks Ernie to help him build a fire, but Ernie says he's not going to help, and he walks off alone. Ernie walks a little ways down the beach, and he finds a large basket of food, or he's hungry, so he eats most of it, but he shares the rest of it with what he finds after he's had his fill. So then Bob asks all the others to help him with the fire, but they're arguing about it and can't decide, and he wants to get going, so he picks up one of the sticks and starts hitting them, demanding that they work to be rescued. So that's our scenario. We have Adam, Bob, Connie, Doug, and Ernie. And my question is, of these 5 people and what you know about them, how do you view the ethics of the participant? Who is the most ethical person? Who is the least ethical person? And hopefully you can write down and rate 1 to 5 as to who you think is ethical and who you think is not ethical. So we now have our quiz, and it's a multiple choice, and we would like you to choose the most ethical person. So we have Adam, Bob, Ernie, Connie, and Doug, and we're going to ask the audience here to choose who they think is the most ethical person. And
all right, people start voting. I need all 51 of you to vote, please. It is acceptable to vote for more than one if you think more than one of these people were
ethical.
Ethical. We're going to see who the audience think was the best or the worst person.
So we're going for the high end here.
Yeah. Vote for the best. And I think you were a bit biased, Boyd, when you were telling the story.
My storytelling?
Yes, because you called dog gentleman 2 times.
Gent. Yes. Well,
and he was the person who did the wrong thing to get the lady to the other island.
Well, but here's the ethical part. Did he do the wrong thing?
Yeah.
We will see. How many votes we got in, C-Mac?
So 40% voted. Please continue voting. I want everyone's votes, please.
You need to be engaged in. The voting is anonymous.
Anonymous. We won't see your names. Please vote.
Yes. I gave this presentation in South Africa, and I will tell this story as we're going through, but I rated the people 1 to 5, and I'll show you my ratings here in a minute as soon as we're done voting. I had a gentleman in the front row who rated the people the exact inverse of the way I rated them. The person I thought was the most ethical, they thought were the least ethical. And that's actually kind of the point of this little exercise and story, is we all have different opinions about this. So
yeah,
we got the votes in. We ready to go?
Yeah, as soon as I passed 50%, which we did. So
okay.
I'm gonna stop here. Let's end polling. There we go. So we have Adam and Connie, the couple.
Okay.
They were the best.
All right. Well, I can't actually see the results, but that's okay. It's not a problem.
I share it. There we go.
Okay. Yeah. Let everybody see. There we go. So we have Adam and Connie rated as the best people, and Bob and Ernie and Doug in decreasing quantity. Doug is actually the lowest. So, all right. So let's close that and go on with the slide. So this was my rating, and clearly this says something different about me because I picked Doug as the best person. And I'll go over the why. That's my next part is the why I picked them this way, just as an explanation. Doug does what he said he's going to do. Connie wants something from him. He wants something from her. They make a fair exchange. The fact that it involves sex and coercive sex is certainly not socially acceptable, but I like that Doug says what he was going to do. Connie and Adam also really did nothing wrong, in my opinion. It's just a personal preference. Connie wanted something. She traded what she had available to her to get it. And Adam, while perhaps a bit distasteful, that now he didn't like Connie for some reason because she traded sex for services. That's Adam's choice, shall we say. And I usually get a little difference in the bottom here because Ernie, the food hoarder, is certainly not a good guy, and he would have been my worst, with the exception of Bob, because Bob hit people. Now, a lot of people rated Bob very high because he tried to build a fire and do something positive to help their situation. But actually striking people, to my mind, crosses a line and makes Bob the worst person. So anyway, whatever you think aside, the point of this exercise is that our ethics are personal. You know, each of us builds on our own life story based on our experience. And actually what's personal is probably our values. And a value differs from an ethic in that it's a personal judgment. So your values are your values. They're not right or wrong, or nobody can tell you that they're wrong. They shouldn't anyway. Your values are what you think they are. That's one of the things you were allowed to build ourselves. However, ethics is a compilation of that, and it's more a group principle than an individual principle. So let's go here to the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of ethics. The discipline of dealing with what's good and bad, and the moral duty or obligation, and then the principles of conduct governing an individual, which conflicts with what I said, or a group. But I think ethics are individual. Excuse me, I think ethics are part of a group activity. The values are individual. So leading into group activity, and this isn't a quiz, but you're probably, most of you, if not all of you, members of the International Geosynthetic Society. As CMAC said, if you're a member of the Australasian chapter of IGS, you're a member of IGS. If you're not, I hope you are. Please join today. It's an incredibly good deal. So most all of us are members of that group. There are many other national or international organizations, civil engineering organizations that many of us belong to. And then companies have ethics policies as well. And I'm going to hit on some of these, McAfee, Solmax, Husker, Tenkate, and not because I'm picking on these people for being better or worse than anybody else. But it's interesting, you know, those are large companies that affect everybody around the world, and it's interesting to take a look at their policies and what their policies say. So the Australasian chapter doesn't have a big code of ethics, but it is mentioned in their bylaws. It encourages honorable and ethical behavior from all its members at all times. The Brazil chapter has a statement of principles. The IGS chapter in the UK has a link to the IGS Code of Ethics, which I'll talk about in a minute. The South African chapter has a standalone Code of Ethics, which is worthy of note and again, fairly well written. But you should, if you're a member of these organizations, you should take a look at it because you've obligated, you know, you've agreed, you've said, hey, I'm going to do this. The IGS ethics policy is last revised in 2015, so that's good. They've kept it fairly current. It's long. It's 3 pages. Covers the general principles of ethics and then the 3 relationships to the public, to the employer and client, and then to each other, and duties to the society. And there are some. So it's worth a look. And at 3 pages, it's a serious document that people put effort into. And if you're an IGS member, you've said that you will agree to that, so you should read it and take a look at it. Some interesting outtakes. A member of the IGS must not make any abusive, racist, sexist, homophobic, ageist, discriminatory, or otherwise inappropriate comments or derogatory or stereotypical remarks about a particular ethnic, political, social, religious group or gender. And that's a really broad, encompassing statement. But it says we're not going to say bad things about people, which is probably a good idea. They also mention further down compliance with the law, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then they also mention, you know, a member of the IGS retained by one client shall not accept without the client's consent and engagement by another if the interests of these two are conflicting. So that's a little complication thrown in, again, that we'll get to. And the IGS has used this policy. I again, won't get into details, but the policy has been quoted back to people, and in some cases, people have been sent warnings about their behavior under the policy. So as a member of the IGS, I'm pleased about that they're using it. So let's return for a couple minutes to this question of the law. each of the companies I mentioned have sections where they relate to the law. And I am not envious of the position of someone in a company who's trying to write an ethics policy, because it's very difficult, particularly companies that participate globally, because in some places the law is a very well-developed thing, and in some places it's not so much. So the Tenkate policy says that functions of Tenkate employees may not contravene the law. Solmac says that the ethics go beyond what is required under the law, that their operations must be conducted in compliance with the law, of course, as well as Solmac's antitrust policy. So they go a little step further. McAfee has other statements. They offer maximum transparency, which is always a good idea. And if you haven't gotten this already, you'll get this through the tenor of the rest of my presentation. You can avoid a lot of ethical problems by telling people what you're doing. And that's what the McAfee maximum transparency thing refers to, and I think it's a good idea. Again, they comply with the laws and regulations in force in place at the time that they're operating. And Husker's a little more open. The Germans are a little more open about it. The avoidance of liability by adherence to the rules of law. And that's what some of these companies are trying to do, and it's a good thing. And you should follow the laws of the country that you're in wherever you are. Couple more nods. Tenkate does an interesting thing about small gifts. You go to somebody's office and you leave them a pen, you leave them a coffee holder, et cetera, et cetera. And they actually address this specifically, putting a limit of 100 euros on it. Again, I'm not criticizing whoever wrote this. I'm sympathetic to it. But I do have to point out that 100 euros in Germany is very different than 100 euros in Central Africa. And 100 euros in Central Africa might not be a soft gift. It might be a hard gift that might represent, a third of what somebody earns in a year. But anyway, they deserve credit for trying to take a look at that. So also a compliment to Husker. In addition to their code of conduct, they also have a sustainability policy, a separate document that covers ecological, economic, and social sustainability of their products. And I think more and more companies are going to start to do that. The IGS now has a sustainability committee, full disclosure, that I serve on. And you as an IGS member should be proud of, but that sustainability thing is going to become increasingly important in our society. But let's get back to the law for a second. I use this South African example, and I'm not trying to criticize the South Africans, but this is the best and most striking example. The picture on the right is actually taken from a Nelson Mandela exhibit. And this was the law in Africa as recently as 1992. So the laws in Africa said that under no circumstances would employer pay Africans, black people, the same rates as white people, even if they do the same work in hours. And a white person could not teach an African servant to read, and you can read the rest of them on the right-hand side. But clearly this is not ethical. Obviously this goes back to apartheid times, but you have to be careful when you follow the law, because sometimes the law is not necessarily the right ethical thing to do, as indicated in this case. So, okay, so you've heard me prattle on long enough. We're going to go to a couple other quizzes. These were originally presented at the ASCE by Robinkemper, who's now the past president. So we need to acknowledge when we steal other people's work. Full disclosure, again, a very good thing. And these were a couple of Robin's case studies, and I leave the typo in there, the Casey study. So you have engineer X, and he works for an engineering firm. And you have an investor group A. They hire engineer X to do an appraisal of a facility. Company Y, who is now going to disappear, they're selling the facility and they want somebody to take a look at it. And this applicable to our industry, somebody wants to take a look at a landfill. So the engineer goes out, performs a survey, fulfills the job requirements, completes a report. He gets paid by engineering investment group A. and they're happy with this report, and everything's okay. By the way, that's not the ethical question. So a little bit of time goes by, and now investor group B is interested in this property. So they go back to engineer X, and they want him to take a look at the property for them. They want to do the same, the same thing. They're thinking of buying it. He hasn't been involved in pricing. No one's told him how much they're going to offer. There's no proprietary information. And they haven't talked about revenues or expenses. This is just, hey, you're an engineer, go out and look and tell us about it. So the question is it ethical for engineer X to perform this appraisal again for investment group B based on what you've seen? So we're going to take a quiz. And there's not as much thinking this time, so I hope you're a little more rapid. But would it be ethical for engineer A to perform an appraisal for group B now that he's done one for group A? So vote now. Vote early and often, as we said in Chicago as I was growing up.
This one is going interestingly.
All right, well, we're all sitting on the edge of our seats, but we'll give them just a minute. Full disclosure, my ethical background, the vote early and often comment. When I grew up in Chicago, I grew up in the Daley era, which some of you may have heard of, but he was what I call effectively corrupt. And that meant that if there was a job open for a garbage collector and somebody's brother-in-law who was in power applied, the brother-in-law was going to get the job. So there was absolutely corruption there. The effectiveness was, though, that if the brother-in-law didn't pick up the garbage, he was going to be out on his butt. So as to how effective that was, we don't know. So, all right, how many votes we got?
Okay, 70%. So I end the polling.
And the result is? Yes, it would be ethical. All right, I'm with you guys. However, if you can clear that for me, CMAC, I'll go to the next slide. The ASE and their ethical policies, and Robin is not. They say it would not be ethical for an engineer to perform the appraisal for B, that he's conflicted because he has to provide full disclosure and agreement of all parties involved, and investment group A would be an involved party before accepting the offer. And I understand that. I understand the potential conflict. In my mind, and probably in the 60, 70% of you that voted the way I think, the events with investment group A are over. You've had it, you've finished it, time has passed, you've been paid, it's completed. And you're not obligated to go back then afterwards. It's clear that if you were in the middle of doing the evaluation for company A and company B asked you to do it, that is not ethical. To me, it's also clear that you can't resell the same work product. In other words, you can't do a survey for company A, you sell it to company A. We're going to get into a discussion about who that belongs to. In my ethical world, that response now belongs to company A. So you can't, as an engineer, resell it to somebody else. But on the other hand, you can redo it. You can go out and, if you conduct a second site visit, take your measurements again, you can regenerate that and sell it to somebody else. But the ASE says no. So before we get to that again, let's do a quick second one. And this hopefully will be a little clearer. I think we'll get more direct voting on it. You have a vice president of an engineering firm, and he falls out with the owner, and he's going to leave and start his own practice. But prior to his leaving, he calls some of the clients and tells them, I've given notice, I'm leaving. And he expresses grave concerns about the firm's ability to provide a similar level of quality of service after he leaves, which seems kind of reasonable. I do this work for you, but I'm leaving. Somebody else is going to be doing this work for you. I think you should know that. That's a reasonable conversation. But clearly there's a line there because several of the firm's clients choose to terminate their work with the former employer, follow the vice president, and establish contacts with his new practice. So the question is, Was it ethical for the engineer to contact several of these firms' clients prior to leaving employment? And then the key differentiation here is contact. Was it okay for him to even talk to these people, much less the conversation that he had? So we'll vote now. And I will refresh my tea.
That was an interesting one, the previous one, Boyd, that you mentioned, the engineer can redo the same work and get paid. But we had this discussion before that here, when you do some work for someone and you deliver it to them, the deliverable becomes your client's property as well as your property. So if you want to use exact the same report to sell it to another person, that's probably why most of our no votes came through.
Yep. And I would compliment our sponsor, TRI, in this regards. I've had several discussions with TRI. They treat things that way. The people that did the work own the report, and you have to have their permission. They've got probably a better database than anybody else in our industry, but they don't just hand it out because it doesn't anymore belong to them.
Right. Okay. This one we had 80% of people voting, and out of that we had, let's see, 83%
said no.
Said no.
Interesting. And now I'd be interested to talk to the people who said yes, because I don't get it. But yeah. Clearly I understand it. Let's just see what the ASCE folks said. They said yes, they said no, it was unethical for the engineer to contact clients before leaving his employment. And then I asked the question during the seminar I attended where I saw Robin present this, and she did give permission for the slides, by the way. She said the key word there being contact. According to the ASCE proposal, once you say you're leaving a company, you stop acting on the company's behalf and you do what the company tells you to do. You don't take your own initiative to call people and tell them you're leaving. That's not an appropriate thing to do. If you want to call them after you've left, you can do that. But anyway, so an interesting story. Okay, so we're going to leave a little room for questions and answers at the end. But as the speaker, I'm going to run through my rant on capitalism. And I include this because for many, many years, I would conclude my presentations with saying that I was a capitalist. And if there was a problem, I expected the marketplace to take care of it. And now I specifically state that I am no longer a capitalist. And I will explain to you why, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. We start out in California, close to where Adam Maskell probably is today, at Ransom Ranch. Now, probably most of you have not heard of Ransom Ranch. It's a property in Mariposa County, California, and it sold a couple of years ago for just under $2 million. And it's the reason I mention Ransom Ranch is I want to introduce the concept of comparables. If you've ever bought a house, your realtor acts on a principle called comparables. They look at property that's been sold recently on your block in your neighborhood, and it's sold for so many dollars a square meter. Therefore, your property should be worth about the same. It's a way realtors use to value things. It's also a way that business people, MBAs, et cetera, use to value companies. If a company manufactures widgets, and they're worth so many dollars a share and they have so many plants, a company with similar number of plants that manufactures widgets that are similar is probably worth somewhere in the same arena of money. So it's an interesting concept. Now, the comparable with Ransom Ranch that is interesting is Yosemite National Park. Some of you may have heard of this. It's a very famous national park. So if you took the dollars per hectare that Ransom Ranch was sold by and went literally right next door and tried to buy Yosemite National Park, The powers that be in our capitalist society, educated in the best universities, say that Yosemite National Park should be worth about $2 billion. It's a lot of money. But my question is Yosemite National Park worth $2 billion? Well, let's look at what some other things are worth. And these are market valuations of companies. And I refreshed this right before the seminar. So you have Facebook at $720 billion. So 350 times more valuable to our human society than Yosemite National Park. Kind of weird. I'm not sure I get that. I don't think the ability to look at cat pictures of cute cats is worth more than Yosemite National Park. I'm not sure on that one. And there's valuations of some other properties. And then again, this is my critique of the capitalist system, so I'll point this out. Marriott, which I am, again, full disclosure, I'm a Marriott guy. I belong to Marriott's program and have for years. But they're worth about $42 billion. Airbnb is evaluated by our society as being worth $90 billion. And I would point out that Marriott owns hotels, buildings, leases, etc. And Airbnb, while really cool, is really just an idea for putting people with other people who want to rent rooms. So I find it hard to see how one is worth nearly twice or over twice as much as the other. So let's take this on from Yosemite National Park to the Australian version, since we're in Australia. I'd like to talk about Budari National Park in Australia. Budari National Park is about 100 kilometers almost straight east of Canberra. I have been there, which is why I selected it. These are the boundaries of the park. It's fairly big, about 62 square kilometers. As I said, I've been there. It's awful. There's nothing there. There's no, I was on this beach, which looks really nice, but I couldn't buy a Coke. I couldn't buy a little umbrella to sit under. There's nothing. It's terrible. There's a couple surfers out there because apparently the waves are pretty good, but like I say, there's nothing there.
Some people will be offended by that.
Well, yeah, and I'll point out I'm being facetious.
I know a few surfers sitting on this webinar now.
Yeah, it's not that there's nothing there. It's that, oh my God, there's nothing there.
Nothing there.
There's nothing there. There's no plastic bottles floating up on the ocean from the ocean. It's a really, really cool place. Undeveloped, unspoiled, and just spectacular. I really enjoyed the time I spent there. So let's quickly go through the same exercise for Budari National Park. It's 61 square kilometers. We'll convert over to Australian dollars. So if you use your comparable from Yosemite, because that unfortunate sale went through, Budari National Park is worth about 55 million Australian dollars. Your comparables there are just as scary. I picked this company first, Aristocrat Leisure, because they make gaming machines in Australia. They make slot machines. And they're valued at several orders of magnitude more than Budari National Park. And I put in Coles, Rio Tinto, Afterpay. This is one I stumbled across that I really have to mention. They're a $32 billion company. And what they do is essentially they function like a credit card. You buy something and you don't have to pay for it till after you buy it. But there's no way that they're worth, thousands of times more than Budari National Park. And there's a reason for this. And the reason is that, there's two reasons. This first slide, the reason is companies are psychopaths. And this quotation that I'll let you read here is from a lawyer who worked with companies. And he said, a corporate entity is obliged only to care about itself and define what is good and what makes it more money. Pretty close to a textbook case of antisocial personal disorder. And corporate persons, and I'm not sure that those exist outside the United States. They certainly shouldn't, even in the United States. but corporate persons are the most powerful people in the world. So companies try to maximize how much money they make. And that's not necessarily a good thing. But the second real problem is that places, oh, going the wrong way, pardon. Places like Budari National Park and Yosemite National Park, you can't put a price on them. They're priceless. And I would refer you to the book so that you see the cover of pictured on the right by Michael Sandel, What Money Can't Buy, the Moral Limits of Markets. And he lays this out in a very, very good, solid case that money can't buy everything, money isn't everything, and that there are limits to what capitalism and markets can do, and we have to manage our society that way. A couple other book recommendations, the Robert Reich book, The Common Good. The message of that book is that we're all in this together. You know, I'm talking to people from all around the world, but even with COVID and the problems of travel restriction, we understand that we're all in this together. What happens in South Africa, what happens in Australia, what happens in Japan, what happens in Korea, all affect me as much as they would if I lived there. And then 3 other book recommendations to close. If you're interested in global warming, I would recommend the David Wallace Wells book. He talks about what's going to happen in a very scientific-based method. And the other 2 books are basically about human nature. The center book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, in my opinion, should be required reading for every human being. It talks about the way our minds work and what we think. We love stories. If I tell you something in a story, you're apt to believe it, even if you don't think that story is necessarily true. And then the book on the right called Sapiens by Yuval Noam, A Brief History of Mankind. And I'll sum up that book in a very short phrase. We're awful. We are not sustainable the way we're living right now. We destroy things. We're just not good to have around. But all good reading that I would recommend. So, and my closing slide, and I won't say this, I'll let you read it. This slide I saw this phrase I saw for the first time when I was very young and a Boy Scout. And I thought it was silly. Even though we were going along cleaning a river at the time I was in Boy Scouts. But the older I get, the more I realize that this saying is absolutely true. And we need to develop a balance between the earth and how we live on it. And, not that capitalism is a horrible thing, but it has some very bad after effects and side effects and unintended effects that we need to shut down. So that's essentially my presentation. I thank you for listening. We have a little time left at the end, and we've done that specifically. Hopefully you've been dropping questions in the Q&A and in the chat line, and CMAC has been combing through. So if you have a particular question or you want to speak for the rights of Connie or Adam or Doug, feel free to jump in and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about for the next couple of minutes.
Very good. Thank you, Boyd. That was fantastic.
Try to make it interesting.
That was very good. So people, please send your questions through. I liked the first poll that we did about the 5 people, and the fact that most of our viewers voted for Adam and Connie, the couple, that in your interpretation, they did nothing wrong. They actually had the highest vote. And this is what I see like a lot, especially living in Australia. Everyone tries to do nothing wrong. Rather than your first choice, that was a person who was basically, you call him a gentleman 2 times, and that was your best person. But that was an interesting one. The other one, Boyd, I thought it's very interesting. Also, you mentioned about the law or policies or law, and in different countries and different organizations. I think it's very interesting to know that law is not necessarily ethical. So you mentioned the example from South Africa, and we know a lot of so-called developing countries have laws that's how they govern their countries or the people, but they're not necessarily ethical. So depending on where we live and what we think about the law, it's important to have that judgment ourselves, ethical judgment.
Correct. And I will admit that being between what you think is ethically right and maybe legally not correct is a very difficult place to be. It's there's usually consequences from being in that place.
Yes.
So it's complicated.
One interesting question, it's basically the topic or the title of our presentation today. We said this is going to be about ethics in geosynthetics. So one of our audience is asking, Boyd, what is your definition or what's your opinion on ethics in geosynthetics? How do you see that more relevant to the geosynthetics industry? We talk generally about other industries, but let's talk more specifically about
geosynthetics. I think our industry is pretty good. We're generally ethical. I'm very proud of our industry and the service we provide to the world. On the environmental side, we're basically, we take all the garbage and help put it in a safe place where it doesn't destroy the atmosphere or the Earth's ecosystem even worse than it's doing now. So that's a good thing. And on the infrastructure transportation side, I think sustainability with geosynthetic construction is very, very augmented. We build things that last longer, that have less greenhouse gas emissions during the process, etc. So it's a very good thing. Like any large group, you have outliers. You have people that will take a sample of something that is not necessarily something they're supposed to be sampling and represent it as material that's different than it is. That's happened in our industry. There's no doubt about that. The thing I'm happy about is that gets caught. It doesn't propagate over and over and over again. Somebody sticks up their hand and says, hey, wait a minute, something's not right. We do a lot of self-policing. Again, a nod to our sponsor, TRI, but there are other companies out there that do third-party independent testing. And they do a good job of policing our industry. And then the whole concept of construction quality assurance. Everybody does a better job when somebody's watching over them. The ethical phrase is, don't do anything you wouldn't want to describe to your grandmother the next day. And it's absolutely true. It seems like a tribal thing, but it's true. Everybody does better when somebody's looking over their shoulder. So.
Perfect. So I have a few people saying that the presentation wasn't necessarily about geosynthetics. Yes, we use some companies like Tenkate, Solmax, McAferry, examples of that. But I think within this couple of minutes of discussion or Q&A, we will look at a few geosynthetics related examples. So stick around and I'm sure you will see some of those examples coming up. One interesting one, and this is like maybe a day-to-day job for all designers or CQA engineers in the geosynthetics. What do you think if let's say, so this is the question is coming from outside Australia, I say. In some cases, consulting engineers specify products and it's a biased, commercially biased.
Again, just like the first example, it's a matter of degree.
Yeah.
If the engineer is bribed to choose a product and chooses a product based on that bribery, that's wrong. That's clear.
Yeah.
If the engineer has selected the product based on the merits of the product, and he wants to use that individual product and is specifying, not something that can go out to common bid, but specifying a proprietary product because he thinks that's better for his project, that's the opposite end of the spectrum. And clearly, you get this stuck in the middle where the engineer, went on a hunting trip with the company whose product he is specifying, that's a little messier. And the engineer needs to consider what he's doing, and at the end of this, the owner and society in general have to get the best product that they can. And they're the people that are getting cheated, and they're the people who should raise objection as to why they're doing that. But it's again, it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum from one end to the other. And my recommendation is full disclosure. This is why I specified the product. And in some cases, I worked with companies that were specifying proprietary products that couldn't be made by others, or products that are patented. And from the company's perspective, they've spent the time and effort and energy to develop that product. They want to collect a premium for that material because they spent time and energy to create it. And that's the whole reason that the patent protection system exists. The laws exist to protect people who come up with new ideas and allow them to gain something from those new ideas. But again, in most countries, the United States, Europe, most developed countries, that patent protection is limited. It lasts for a while, but then it expires. And the general benefit of that should then go to society. So,
sure. Another question, and this is again coming from outside Australia. It's mentioned in the name, but I just changed them to A and B. So let's say we work for company A, a manufacturing, a geosynthetics manufacturing company A, and we are working on a project, and we think or we believe that the product from company B is more suitable for this particular project. Is it ethical to be working under company A, but specifying or maybe advising the client to go buy a product from company B?
I think so. And your boss is not going to like that, and you need to phrase it appropriately. But I would use that as an opportunity to plant a seed for a future sale. I would say, look, in this case, I don't have the best product for you. I can give you advice on what's available in our marketplace, and I've gone this route. In this particular case, something that I don't make is probably the best thing for you to use. I want to keep supplying you. I want to supply you what I can supply you. And I would use that as an opportunity to try and lock in that future sale.
Yeah. To be honest, it has happened to me. Like, I have spoken with some representatives from a manufacturer or supplier company that they have been honest and open and said, we have this product, but we think that one is better. And that actually increased the level of trust between me and themselves. And, next time I was, for the next project, I was happier to get advice from them. And
yep.
Like you said, it increases the future sales for them. Another question, we have 3 minutes before we finish our 1 hour event. Okay. It's an interesting one, and it's a generic one. I remember after watching the series called Peaky Blinders, I watched one of the interviews from the main actor who was playing Tom Shelby, and his interpretation of his role was that Tommy does all the wrong things, but for right reasons. So the question is here, I'll just read that for you. Is it ethical for a company or person to sell an equivalent? Oh, sorry, this is the question. With ethics in mind, in your opinion, who is worse? A person who does something good for the wrong reason, or someone who does something perceived as wrong, but for the right reasons?
Okay, I'll start with, this is my personal opinion.
Okay.
I don't think the reasons for doing things are as important as the outcome of the thing themselves. I think the actual events and what actually happens in fact are more important than the intentions. And to go back to our example, that's why the guy that I rated lowest you know, his intentions were good. He wanted everybody to be rescued. He wanted everybody to help him build a fire.
Yeah.
But his actions were hitting people. And so I think the actual event, the actual things that happen, which you don't always control, are more important than what happens internally. You know, the right for me to swing my arm and make a fist ends right here at the end of your chin. I don't have the right to hit you. I can get mad. I can internalize a bunch of stuff. But what actually happens in the real world is factually what really matters.
Very good. Thanks again, Boyd, for your time and very, very interesting, fantastic presentation. Thank you everyone for attending this webinar today. Let me just announce that our next event that will be on 24th of February, 2021, presented by Craig Benson, a professor of University of Virginia. So Craig is a well-known academic in the geosynthetics industry. The topic he's going to present is forensic assessment of the in-service condition of final covers over historic uranium mill tailings disposal facility in the US. So I encourage you to definitely jump online on our website and register for the February webinar by Craig Benson. And thanks again, Boyd. Thanks everyone for attending, and we will see you in next event.
Thank you all. Be safe, wear your masks. Good day.
Thanks.